G'day everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Spark Your Fire. It's your host David Shee here. Glad to be here as always, talking about everything and anything about property. And today we've got our returning guest, Branden Sarafov from Property Comet, back on the show again. Branden, how are you doing, mate?
I'm doing well, thanks, David. How are you, mate?
Good, very good. Thank you for jumping back on. I'm sure a lot of people was waiting eagerly for the remainder of your story last time. I mean, we dragged on a little bit because we spoke everything. I think last time we went up to almost an hour. And we just couldn't cover off everything. So essentially we had to kind of go, okay, well, let's leave the rest of the portfolio to another episode. So, and I know you've been busy, so that's why, we thought we'll give it a few more months. And, but from what I've gathered, you actually bought one more property since our last conversation as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I ended up purchasing another property about the middle of this year.
Middle of this year.
So able to secure that, which was good,
Awesome.
and into a different market, so a market that I hadn't purchased in personally before. So
Yeah,
that was
right.
quite exciting.
No, that's good. That's good. We'll definitely jump into that today. But I guess, first of all, just to recap, because I guess it's been a couple months since we last spoke about your property portfolio. Um, so in terms of your total value as of today, roughly, I'm not saying to have to be exact figures, but your total property portfolio today, how many properties are there in your portfolio today?
Yeah, so at the moment there'd be seven.
There'll be seven. Okay. And what will be the estimated total value?
Yeah, so from most recent memory, I suspect it'd be around sort of 3.7 million.
3.7.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Trending in the right direction, that's for sure. I think if my memory serves me correct, your goal was 5 mil by in about in the next 12 months or something from memory.
Yeah, and the next year I wanted to get to around that 5 mil mark.
Yeah.
Obviously, with the
Right.
way that the market's gone, slightly retracting the last six
That's
months.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll see how we go, but yeah, they've still got that goal inside at the moment.
Good man. I mean, there's things that you can control and there's things that you can't control. Like the macro side of things, there's nothing that you can do about it. I guess you can only control what you can control. So it's good that you still set your foot down in terms of try to crack that 5 mil in the next 12 months. Fantastic. What's the total LVR roughly like throughout the portfolio? Do you know?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think it'd be around probably around 60%, I think.
60. Yeah,
Yeah,
good. It's got, yeah, the last couple of years would definitely have increased the value quite a bit, right? So
that's right. Obviously, as I said, like this year hasn't been as explosive as what it was last year, but basically anything that I had pre, um, pandemic has
yeah.
essentially seen really good growth, as I'm sure many other investors have experienced as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. All right. So I think we'll do a quick recap in terms of because the three properties that we touched on last time. First one was Strathpine, if my memory was correct. Strathpine was pretty much a bread and butter purchase, but you were able to recycle equity out pretty quickly from that property. Is that correct, Brendan?
Yeah, so first purchase was Strathpine,
Yeah.
then ended up saving up for the second deposit,
Second
which
deposit.
was
Okay.
in Woodridge.
Yep.
We then utilised the equity from Strathpine, and I think we tapped into Woodridge as well to then
Yep.
go and make third and fourth purchase.
Okay.
So for third purchase was in Bethania.
Bethania. Yep. Okay. And fourth purchase was
Then ended up purchasing in Logan Home.
Logan Home. Okay. Strathpine North, Bethania, Woodridge South. So both in Logan section, and Logan Home is also in Logan section. Okay. So you pretty much become Lord of Logan since then.
That's right. I did start looking into that market a lot more.
What attracted you to buy in Logan Home since then?
I think a combination of different things. I was very happy with the purchase we made north side because a lot of factors that would suggest that I was going to see some strong price growth moving forward when we purchased, and it
Mm,
has since then.
mm.
But then looking on the south side, being Logan, from a macro perspective, its location from Brisbane, location from Gold Coast was quite attractive. But I think more importantly, at the time, the yields were much higher than what we could have got in the north side of
In the
Brizzy.
north.
And when you're wanting, as you know, to build a larger portfolio, cash flow really starts to come into play further down the track. And so for that reason, that's why we started to look into those slightly cheaper markets, such as Logan, where we're able to get higher yields in comparison to the north of Brizzy.
And the relatively low purchase price is the key in terms of why it can get such a high yield, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So purchasing back then, obviously today vastly different. But back then it was across the board quite cheap in comparison to not only Brisbane itself, but I suppose many other markets.
Yeah. How much did you bought this one for, Logan Home?
Yeah, so Logan Home one was an interesting one because I had a budget, I think of around 350 when I was looking for that property.
Okay.
And I sort of had been looking around for a little while, sort of come across the right property at the time. And I think we may have briefly touched on it in our last chat as well, but I ended up finding the property on like the second or third page of the listings, and I think it had finance had fallen through, so it was under contract, and then finance had ended up falling through. So just out of curiosity, I'd reached out to the agent because it was still on, I think it was realestate.com. Yeah, and she mentioned that it came back onto the market within a couple of days of me speaking to her. So I think a lot more buyers at the time probably weren't aware that it had come back to market, and so I started to then negotiate, knowing that the vendor's probably looking at selling it relatively quickly, given they thought it was already sold.
Yeah.
So ended up purchasing that for 335, I think it was, and then after 35. The BNP negotiated it down to around 330.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. And what sort of property was it? Is it a 3-bedroom, low set, brick house? Yeah,
so it was 4 by 1 by 1. The fourth bedroom sort of can be used as a sort of second entertaining area, but it does close off for a bedroom. So, but it is a low set house, brick house. I think it was probably the smallest block of land that I've bought, which was around 460 square meters. So before that, I was sort of always had in the back of my mind of wanting to buy around 600. Obviously that gives a little bit more options on the property as well. But given the purchase price of the property, I'd seen a lot more comparables going a lot higher than 350, which was, as I said, the budget I was working with. So from that side of things, I was sort of willing to take a chance on it, even though it was slightly smaller block size.
Was it a newer build as well? On a smaller block?
Yeah, so it's newer compared to all the other properties I've purchased. But I think it was around
the 80s, basically.
No, that's right. Yeah. I think it was early 90s or mid 90s.
Okay.
Which, ultimately I do steer sort of clear of newer properties. Sort of across the board. But given that it's still sort of 25, 30 years old at the time, it's still been relatively established for a while.
Okay. So that one's 330 purchase price. And what sort of rent was it fetching?
I think we had tenants at the time that were already in there, and they were paying 350, but it was on a periodic lease. So straight away I was able to throw that up to 400. Today it's moved up even further, and because the market's moved so quickly, I think at the moment it's 450. But if I was to throw it onto the market, you'd probably get anywhere from 5 to 550. At the moment. So even though you ultimately the yield I purchased it at was still relatively lucrative, but when you compare it to what the yield you could get today, given it's only owned it for a couple of years, it's quite astronomical. What number I'd probably be able to get, because at $550 a week, if I was to spend 330, you probably wouldn't find that anywhere across the country.
No, they're starting to become extinct, just like dinosaurs. Basically, I don't think there's many areas, or in capital cities at least, that I'm aware of, that you can still get a property that's around a $300,000 type of mark and fetching you that kind of rental yield, isn't it?
Exactly right.
Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. So this is property 4 with Logan Home. Any value add or anything that you can do to this property down the track, or is it just purely a buy and hold?
More so a buy and hold. It was. I wouldn't say it was dated or need really that much TLC, but I think I could come back to it, spend a little money, send a little bit of money internally, and do a bit of a cosmetic renovation to it.
Oh yeah.
I've done that a number of times this year, which we can sort of touch on shortly. But I think, there's always a little bit of a disparity between renovated and unrenovated properties
Yeah.
in any market, really. So, I could potentially spend sort of anywhere from 10 to 20 grand and probably manufacture some equity that way as well.
Nice. Okay. Good. All right. Awesome. All right. Okay. So let's Logan home. And where's the next one then?
Yeah. So next one was interstate. So, well, I suppose all of them were interstate, but outside of Brisbane, I should say.
Okay.
So ended up looking in Adelaide for the fifth purchase.
Adelaide. Yep. Okay.
So we'd accumulate the first four and then got to the stage where we sort of said, well, not that it was probably going to deter us from buying again in Brisbane, but if we would continue to buy there, we'd start to accumulate land tax. And I also had seen Brisbane really move quite quickly in terms of cap growth at the time. So we thought to ourselves, well, we might as well diversify and look into another market. So we ended up purchasing fifth one in Adelaide, as I said. So that one was in Christie Downs, which
Christie
is
Downs.
south of Adelaide.
Yep.
About 30 minutes from CBD, probably about 5 minutes from the beach down there. So that actually ended up at the time being the most expensive property we purchased. I think actually overall it would have been most expensive property we purchased, which we ended up spending 420,000 for that. So that particular property, we're sort of obviously looking to buy into a different market, as I mentioned, but also looking to find something that had sort of given us a little bit more options should we choose to use that further down the track. And so the property itself ended up being on about an 800 square meter block, which has subdivision potential. So I think we can probably end up building around three or four different townhouses,
Nice.
sort of villas, depending on whatever route we end up going down. So that was another big reason behind the purchase as well. So not necessarily just looking for bread and butter properties, but also looking at what we can add to the portfolio now, which will sort of give us more options should we want to go down that route.
Why Christie Downs?
Yeah, so at the time, as I mentioned, we obviously spent most of the time focusing on Brisbane.
Yeah.
I was then thinking, where are we going to go to next? Given the budget that we had, which I think was maybe 450, we sort of said, well, we obviously eliminate a number of markets by just having that budget initially. So, straight off the bat, we could sort of eliminate Sydney, Melbourne, which is what we had done originally anyway. Then eliminate Brisbane. So I sort of was quite bullish on Adelaide and then also Perth as well at the time because of where those markets were within their cycle and what I could sort of see taking place at the time through the research that I was doing. So with that, and then obviously looked within Adelaide, started to look into different pockets. And I sort of formulated the plan of wanting to buy one south and one north of the CBD just to be able to diversify.
Okay.
There was a number of suburbs in and around Christie Downs at the time where you could sort of spend around 400,000 and pick up something decent.
Yeah.
So it just so happened that when we were looking, that property came to the market and ticked all the boxes, and so that's why I ended up pouncing on it.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's good. So Christie Downs, you say 5 minutes from the beach, basically. Is the property within walking distance to the beach, or is it kind of still have to drive a little bit?
You probably still have to drive. I think you'll probably be a couple kilometers away.
Yeah.
But 5 minutes
Close
drive.
enough.
So pretty close to the beach, which was good.
Yeah.
And I sort of said at the time, like, you really can't find anywhere across the country where you're within sort of a decent commute to the CBD, but also, short driving distance to the beach as well. So from a macro perspective, it made a lot of sense as well.
Okay. So this one had a bit of unique, I guess, from a land size perspective, you got potential development down the track. And at the same time, it's kind of got that close to the beach factor as well, which is quite unique by itself. What sort of tenants have you got in there at the moment? Are they like
Yes,
retirees or
originally it was tenanted when we purchased it.
okay?
I think it was only tenanted at around 290 a week on a periodic
290.
lease, which is quite low, as you can imagine, if you're spending 420.
Yeah.
However, in saying that, I knew that was way below market. And so straight from the get-go, as soon as we purchased it, we ended up throwing it from 290 up to 390 to meet the market, basically. So most stuff at that time, three bedders were sort of renting around the high 300s.
Yeah.
So in terms of a yield, I probably could have got maybe a slightly better yield in other locations, but then obviously the draw card was the land size and what we could do with that.
Yeah.
Today, funnily enough, it's actually renting. It's out advertised on the market at the moment because the tenants had moved out probably around 2 to 4 weeks ago, and we've been doing
Okay.
renovations to it
All
for the last
right.
sort of month.
So this is the one that
So,
you did renovations on, is it?
well, yeah, actually, I've ended up doing three renovations this year. Um,
This is one of them.
yeah, this is one of them. I didn't plan to do three, but it just so happens that that's how things took place. So this is one of them. We basically did a cosmetic reno.
Okay.
Um, we spent about 15,000 to fix the flooring,
Hmm.
carpets, paint.
Hmm.
Did some work in the kitchen. We're going to be doing some work to the blinds, the yard, all that sort of stuff. So all sort of cosmetic work. Because it was quite tired as well. So it needed that, and ultimately could have rented it out as is, but probably going to be attracting lower quality tenants,
Mm.
given the state of what it was. So now I'm pretty happy with the condition of it, and hopefully be renting it out in the next week or so.
So you spend about 15K, and how much rent would you be bumping it up?
So we'll probably end up getting about 430.
430
Um,
from
yeah,
390 to 430?
that's right. So
Okay.
I was wanting to get around sort of 450, and that's what we were sort of chasing. But it's a bit of a challenging time at the moment to find tenants because obviously we're what 4 odd weeks from Christmas.
Christmas, yeah.
So, and I have had the same situation last year with one property whereby we threw it onto the market and there's just not a lot of applicants at the moment that are really looking.
Mm.
So for that reason, we sort of decided to pull it down from 450 to 430. And so quietly confident that we'll be able to get someone in the next sort of week for that. So the trade-off for $40 for sort of 15 grand spent, you know, it's probably not the best that we could have achieved, but ultimately I think we've manufactured some equity from a cap growth perspective,
Yeah.
as well as the property needed that to be done
Needed some
anyway.
tidy up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Was it one of those 60s shack type of properties, or what type of property was it?
I think it was early 70s, but yeah, it
70s,
was.
yeah.
It's bricked home, three bedroom. Not, I suppose it's a decent size, but yeah, it's relatively old. Obviously, that's sort of 50 odd years. I don't think there'd been done that much work to it over the last sort of couple of
Yeah.
decades or so.
Gotcha. Okay. When did you buy this one?
That would have been, I think, August, September 2021.
Okay. So August,
Um,
September last year, basically.
yeah, that's right.
Nice one. Okay. And then, yeah, with the renovations, did you fly there to do it yourself? Did you engage tradies? How did you get this done?
Yeah, so fortunate enough that property managers that I work with are relatively good from that side of things.
Oh, good. Okay.
I have sort of heard that some PMs sort of steer clear of doing renovations and stuff like that, but I've been pretty fortunate. I think that's because I'm quite selective on who I use. And they say essentially had gone through the process of obtaining all the quotes and everything like that. So
Nice.
um, obviously they're not going to be there at the property every time someone needs to get through. So we sort of just put a lockbox on the property,
Yep.
have the tradies go in when they're available, and conduct all the work that way.
So the PM was the one that basically coordinates in terms of the schedule of the work, the quotes, who's going to have to go in first, what's going to be next done, that kind of thing, isn't it?
That's right. And I think if you can find someone that's willing to do that, first of all, I think they're obviously going to be providing a lot of value to you, not just from managing your property, but also the contacts that they would have likely going to be superior than,
Mm.
someone you're going to find, or you're going to spend a lot of time trying to, find the right person to do the job. So, it's much easier to be able to have them send out their tradesmen because they know that they're going to be quite competitive from a price perspective, and they know how they work, rather than myself going out and trying to
Yeah.
get a number of different quotes for each of the different items that needed to be done.
I was expecting you to be rolling up your sleeves, Brendan. Flying over, get the flooring done, it'll be like painting jobs, couple of day and nights, stay at the house and that kind of stuff. But anyway, you're over that stage now.
Yeah, that's right. I was happy to pay people to do it instead.
Good man. That's a smart way of doing it. Did the PM actually charge any fee in terms of doing this project management or
No, not really. It was
no?
more
Just part of
so
the service.
just that's right. So essentially, we knew that the property was going to be vacant once the lease ended, and
Yep.
so we sort of have a conversation around, all right, what are we going to do if any work needed to be done to get it back onto the market to rent it out. And we both sort of agreed, all right, we'll do this, this, and this. And I sort of just said, like, I prefer to work with this budget if we can fit as many things as we can into the budget that we had, which, as I said, was about 15,000. And then he just went through the process of obtaining all the quotes and stuff like that. But we did have a chat around sort of what's going to be best value spent, and what items are going to be, yeah, the necessary ones in order to make the property obviously look the best that it can, but also to fix anything that needed to be to fixed anyway.
Nice one. I mean, sounds like a great steal for this one, given the fact that it's got zoning advantages and also close to the beach. So I would have thought that it would attract fairly decent tenants. Well, in comparison to the ones that you get in Logan anyway. So
yeah, that's right. So I mean, we'll wait to see how we go from renting it out, but pretty confident that we should be able to get some decent tenants in the next couple of weeks as well. So
nice. Okay, awesome. With the vacancy rates around Adelaide at the moment, I don't think you'll have much trouble. But the tricky part is about this time at the moment, the time of the year right now. So okay, so that's Christie Downs. And what about next one? Where did you go after? Did you went north?
yeah, so went north of Adelaide. So still wanted to stick to Adelaide. Still thought it was quite promising.
Cool.
And this one was relatively close in terms of time frame to that Christie Downs purchase. So we bought in, as I said, it was around August, September time, and then the next one ended up being, I think it was November.
Oh, very close.
So basically, 2-3 months. I was pretty much looking as soon as the other one settled. So diving straight back into the market. This time wanting to look north just to be able to diversify a little bit. So end up buying in Parafield Gardens.
Parafield Gardens. Okay. Yep.
So it's about, I think, half hour again from the CBD, northeast.
Northeast. Yeah.
Salisbury sort of area. So I was trying to look at a couple of suburbs that were slightly closer to the CBD, but I sort of just kept getting pushed out from a price perspective. So I ended up settling on this property, but it actually has probably the most interesting story to it. And I don't think we got a chance to touch on it last time. So, again, I was looking in Adelaide. The market was quite competitive at the time. Stuff was selling relatively quickly, so I was finding it challenging to find a property that ticked all the boxes where I wasn't going to pay over the odds. I had a similar budget to the first one where I probably could have gone up to 450, but sort of preferred to stick around 400k mark if possible.
Sure.
There was one property that I ended up going to auction for, which was in a suburb slightly closer, probably 5-10 minutes closer to the CBD. Fortunately at the time, because obviously we're going through COVID, a lot of agents started to do obviously face-to-face auctions, but they also allowed people to attend auctions online.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I was actually getting outbid, not just at auction, but in terms of private sales from other investors, because they were just essentially spending over the odds. And so I was struggling to find something that, as I said, ticked all the boxes that I thought was worth the value. So I've sort of reached out to a number of different agents and looked at going to auction for a couple of properties. I spoke with broker about it at the time, and she sort of said, yeah, everything's all good. We've got pre-approval there, so
Hmm.
you can jump straight in if that's what you want to do.
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, I can't imagine too many interstate investors would be jumping on online auctions. So I feel like I could sort of beat the market and only be competing with locals. So I did go to an auction online whereby I registered. They had actually held, I think they had an iPad or something like that. And so
Okay.
they held the iPad out the front of the auction
Yeah,
as it
right.
took place,
Yeah.
um, which I thought was quite funny. And then I had a budget of 420. And as soon as the auction started, the auctioneer sort of asked, opening offers, and someone came in at 450. And so straight away I was like, oh, well, I'm just sitting here for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I can't really do anything. It's over my budget straight away, and ended up selling for like 530,
Jesus. Wow. Okay.
which was, I actually ended up getting my property manager to go check out the property, and we sort of both agreed that it was a 450, 460K property. I had my fingers crossed, hoping I could get, low 400s, and that's why I sort of went to it. But
Yeah.
yeah, there was that much interest in it. And I think, the block size was decent, but it was really run down. So everyone ended up spending that, would have spent a bit more money on top of that. So it just goes to show what the market was doing at the time. People were just paying way above the odds. So a little bit disappointed with that, but I ended up getting a call the day before from another agent who had a property going to market, and they were a little bit less straightforward about it, because she said, yeah, look, we weren't planning on doing anything online. The auction is face to face, but maybe we can try and tee something up for you if you're interested. I said, yeah, that's fine. So straight after the first auction took place, on that weekend, I think she ended up giving me a call and asking if I still wanted to go to auction. And I said, yeah, listen, I'll join if you can sort something out. And then basically what happened was she ended up getting another one of the agents from that agency to give me a call after the first auction. And he essentially said, hey, mate, happy for me to assist you throughout this online auction. I said, yeah, let's go for it. So he ended up calling me on Facebook, on my phone, and actually ended up conducting the auction over Facebook Messenger.
Yeah, right.
And so rather than, like, the other one was a little bit more formal, whereby you fill out all your details, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They then allow you into the Zoom meeting, you jump into space, and then so on. Whereas this one is just like, yeah, look, we don't have anyone else that's online, but I'll call you on Facebook half an hour before we start, and I'll take you through the property, and I help you out throughout the process. So I'm like, yeah, okay, that sounds great. So he ended up calling me, half hour before this section auction took place. And we went through the property together. He was just showing me around. Then the auction ended up starting. Again, was working with my 420K budget. This property was a little bit further out than the first one, but in much better condition. Auction started, and I could see, based on what he was showing me, there was probably only maybe 10, 15 people there. And so I thought it was a lot less than the previous auction, so I thought that was quite promising. Auction got underway, and he sort of asked, the auctioneer asked anyone to start off the opening bids. It was relatively quiet, I think, as it is initially at any auction. And so the agent was just like, do we want to start at, I think it was maybe 300 or something. I said, yeah, let's go for it. So started at 300. Then there was probably two other bidders during that auction. One went to 325. I think we started going up by tens. We got up close to around the 390 mark, and it was pretty quiet at the time. And so I sort of, realization started to kick in, where I was thinking, like, I probably haven't got a chance of getting this property, because the one I went to earlier sold for 100 grand more than my budget. And this is a nicer property, despite being slightly further away. But it started to get a little bit quiet, and I started to think to myself, well, maybe actually I'm in for a chance here. So unfortunately, someone ended up then bidding at around 400. And at that stage, I thought, same thing's going to happen. We're going to go past my budget. I started going up by, I think it was twos or threes. So we sort of went 403, 406, trickling our way up in the low 400s. we ended up getting to 416, and I think the other bidder had it at 416, and auctioneer sort of got to the point where he started counting, going once, going twice, but then he ended up pausing because of the communication online. I sort of thought that he had said sold, and so I thought that it had sold. I'm like,
That was it.
back to square one.
Mm.
But he'd actually gone inside to speak with the vendors because I don't think that they had reached the threshold that they sort of set for themselves.
Oh,
And so I'm not sure what the reserve was, but I have a feeling just based on how it took place that we hadn't hit it. And because he knew that we were going to sort of sell at 416, he wasn't going to hit the hammer because I'm assuming they wanted to get a higher price.
higher, yeah.
So I had a conversation with the agent. I said to him, look, mate, budget is 420. I can't go above it. He's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to 420? I'm like, and I was pretty unconfident at the time, thinking that the other bidder has just continued to outbid me each time I've gone up by 2 or 3. So I said, we'll go to 418 and we'll leave it there. If we get it, and so be it. So he come back out. We offered 418. I'm expecting them to go to 420, and then I'm sort of out of it. But whatever reason, they must have been at their max budget as well, and ended up securing it at 418.
Oh wow, awesome.
So I was pretty stoked with that because I sort of ran a number of different calculations and looked at a number of comparable sales and thought it was probably valued around 450. And also I just thought it was quite funny, actually, the fact that I ended up purchasing a property over Facebook Messenger or video chat or whatever, which is a funny story to tell, moving forward. So, even the agent that was selling the property, I was in my bedroom at the time while doing the auction. He's like, you ever bought a house from your bedroom before? And I'm like, no, I don't think I've done it this way, actually.
There's always going to be a first somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Somewhere. That's a great story, though, I got to say. But it can show, I guess, a couple of things that stood out for me. Why is that property significantly less attract less people? Like, why wouldn't they want to market it the same way as what the other properties are being marketed, given the fact that the market was red hot at that point in time, right? Like, you're already seeing from the previous auction, in terms of what they can achieve when you got the crowds and when you got the people bidding against each other. So was there anything that was stopping the agent? Because that should be the sales agent's role, is to try to get the highest price. But, what was, from your understanding, what was the reason why they didn't want to market it the same way as the other properties?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really don't know the answer, to be honest. I sort of thought to myself, the other property was in a more expensive location, was closer to the city, but the condition was like, I knew straight off the bat that I was going to have to spend a bit of money just to rent it out.
Yeah.
Whereas this one was quite clean, less than 10 minutes further away from the CBD. That first one, I think, ended up selling for like 530-ish.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, if that's selling for 530, yes, better location, but worse property, you'd assume that obviously it's only one property compared to, but all my sort of research had directed me to suggest that second property one I ended up purchasing was around that 450K mark. You could even argue 460, maybe 470 at the time, with the way the market was going. So if any owner occupier had come in, or an investor that was quite emotional, you can imagine that they'd be willing to spend sort of up to 500. The auction was in the afternoon. I don't know whether maybe people had gone to a number of auctions that morning and sort of said, well, everything's selling above and beyond, may not even bother. There was less people than the initial auction that I went to, but still had 10, 15 people turn out, but ended up only really having 3 people bid.
3 bidders.
Me and 2 other bidders. And I even ended up saying to the agent that was selling it afterwards, I'm like, I think this is a 450K property. Once I purchased it, and he just sort of looked at me. He was quiet. He didn't say anything after that. So I think
you gave him the final blow.
Yeah,
mate.
I think he knew. He's like, yeah, it's definitely going unders. And so I think they were a little bit gutted. I think the vendors were probably a little bit disappointed as well. You're in a hot market. Bearing in mind, they obviously still would have made decent coin on that if I think the property had sold before that 10, 15, 20 years. So they would have picked it up
Absolutely.
a long time ago for a lot cheaper. But I think given the market, they probably would have expected a higher price. And I do think the way that it played out, I was pretty confident the reserve must have been closer to the 450 mark. But once they came out, they sort of said they were a slightly older couple. And I think they've just decided, no, well, we're here now. We want to sell it. Whatever
Yeah.
we get, we'll take.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
so I suppose it goes to show, like, obviously auctions typically will be used in a hot market, to have buyers compete against one another, make it as emotional as they can. I think I just probably just got quite lucky in that sense, with the way that things played out. And so I ended up purchasing for obviously a really good price. So, if that second bidder wasn't there, it's potentially the potential I could have purchased it for like 390, which would have just been a massive steal. But I take it as it is because it's already a good deal nonetheless.
That's already a very good steal, regardless at 418 anyway. So yeah, what's so special about this property that attracted you?
Yeah, so again, as I said, close proximity to the CBD. The market at the time was moving quite quickly,
Yeah.
and it was probably the last or one of the last couple of suburbs that I could get in terms of that distance to the CBD for that price point. So, as I mentioned, the property I went to before that, in that suburb was well into the 500s now, considering that property that I missed out on and sold for low 500s. So that side of things, macro perspective, made sense. Also, when I was doing research on the property itself, like internally, it was had been kept and maintained quite well. Being owner occupiers, they'd looked after it. I don't know how long ago, but they renovated the kitchen and they would have spent a decent amount of money on that. So kitchen was completely renovated.
Nice.
Yard work needed a little bit of maintenance, but overall, I think they looked after the property relatively well. One thing from a numbers perspective, which was quite enticing, was the block size was about, I think it was just over 600 square meters, and it had about a 20-meter frontage.
Okay.
So I looked at comparisons, and within suburbs closer to the CBD, as well as a suburb being Parafield Gardens, a lot of the properties there, newer properties, have been from people who had knocked down on a 600 square meter block and had built two smaller houses, sort of 300 square meters. And in order to do that, the requirements for that is you need to have, I think it was at least 600 square meters, as well as each property needs to have a 9-meter frontage, which means that in order for me to do that, I need to have at least 18 meters. So I looked at it from that perspective as well, sort of tying in similar to the property in Christie Downs, whereby down the track, I could, if I wanted to, bulldoze the property there now, build two properties side by side, each 300 meters, and essentially have two properties on the same plot of land. And those properties at the time were selling for around 450. Those newer builds on 300 square meter blocks. So considering that I paid 420, I sort of thought to myself, at that stage, from a numbers perspective, it probably doesn't make sense to do this now, but theoretically I could bulldoze this build and probably still walk away with a little bit of capital in the end. So over time, obviously, as the suburb grows, I think that'll become much more lucrative to do as well.
Yeah. Wait maybe a cycle or two cycles, and then the numbers will look really stellar afterwards, I would say. Yeah, isn't it? Like, that's the thing with development. I mean, you're buying for the future potential that you can do to it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be executing it now, because the numbers may not necessarily make sense from today's figures. Yeah, just there's a bit of game of patience here as well, but at least you got the control of the asset, which is the most important part, because you would have a say about what you can do in the future when you want to, and when the timing is right. And I think that's always important. I can see that certainly with the Christie Downs and this Parafield Gardens property. You're now looking a lot more than just a vanilla bread and butter type of property. You're looking at, and you're thinking about, what can I do down the track as well? So yeah, that's really good to know. Awesome. All right. Well, look, I do want to cover the last property as well. Okay. So, where's the last property and when did you buy that one?
Yeah, so that one's is in Perth. So
Okay.
again, by that stage, the Adelaide market had sort of moved, and those properties I purchased started to really grow in value as well as across the rest of that market. So I jumped into the space again, this time with I think I had a 400K budget to work with.
Okay.
Um, Quite limiting if you were looking in Brisbane and Adelaide. And so the next option for me was to look into Perth,
Perth. Yep.
and I thought it was quite promising at that time. So this is all sort of only 6 months ago.
Okay. Yep.
Um, I did try to get finance at the end of 2021, and I was a bit disappointed. If I had, I'd been able to obviously purchase 6 months earlier, because that next 6 months made quite a significant difference from a price point perspective.
Mm.
But I suppose you have your wins and your losses, and in this case, I had to sort of sit on the sidelines for a few more months to get finance to then go again.
Yeah.
But that purchase ended up being in a suburb called Coolungup,
Pulling up.
which is in and around the Rockingham area.
Yep. Okay.
So it's about 45 minutes from CBD, and again, probably 10, 15 minutes from beaches and the West Coast over on that side.
Okay.
So I actually ended up going over to Perth probably around March time, early in the year, and spent probably about a good week over there. First time over there, but really enjoyed it. Very, very big fan of the city there, so it's very nice. The shame it's not closer, because I'd spent a lot more time there, but the market itself is doing really well at the moment, particularly despite the rising interest rates. So
Yeah.
That was the next step for me to purchase into that market. The property itself, again, I was looking for sort of typical sort of property I had been purchasing previously, sort of established house, decent land size with a potential X factor.
Yeah.
In this case, I ended up purchasing a 3x1 low set brick house. As I said, in Coolungup, and I paid $355 for that.
55. Yep. Okay.
So I ended up spending, that property needed a bit of work from the get-go as well. So we ended up spending about 15 grand to renovate that. So I ended up being sort of all in for 370. But once we had gone through the process of doing that work, it actually came out quite nice. I was very happy with how that renovation went. And so big benefit of that particular property was, one, I wanted to diversify, get into the Perth market. I bought a couple other properties for clients and stuff like that over in that market, and was from a research perspective, looked quite promising. So I wanted to be able to dive into that market myself as well. The property itself is a corner block. It's about 700 square meters. And so I don't think longer term at least in the short term, I wouldn't do anything from a development perspective, but I could come back to it further down the track and utilize that to do something with it. There's a decent amount of land on one side where it is adjacent to the other street that it connects to, and I could definitely fit, I think, a granny flat or something like that there as well. So the purchase price was good. I was able to manufacture some equity through the renovation that we did. Yield was attractive. The location being in that particular capital city, I was quite bullish on, as well as it sort of came with that X factor of a potential granny flat down the track. It's not a common, not as commonplace over there at the moment, but I suspect over time, it'll probably begin to pick up like it sort of did in Brisbane as well in the last sort of decade. So all of those sort of stacked up, and was pretty happy with that purchase. So I ended up picking that up, and many of comparable properties in that condition have sort of been going around the 400K mark as well. So we're sort of looking at 5-10% under market, despite the market being relatively hot over the last 12 months over there.
So basically for this Perth purchase, you've gone there for 1 week, you stay there, you actually do your due diligence in terms of the areas yourself. But you didn't purchase the property on the go or on the trip. You purchased the property later on, using the same approach as how you purchased in Brizzy and Adelaide, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
That's right. So, it was probably going to be very unlikely. I don't even know if I had finance at the time.
Mm,
So I don't even know whether I was looking at I don't think I was. I think I was still a couple of months away, but I'd done the same thing in the other markets as well.
yeah.
So
Okay.
spent time on the ground, you know, you can do a lot of research which directs you into a certain direction across the country. But it's always good to be on the ground and to actually have a look around and see what the area is like. And we obviously talked about Logan earlier, and that type of I suppose demographic of the people that live there, sort of working class, so on. But I felt Rockingham and all the way down to Mandurah, I was actually quite surprised at how nice those areas were. And sort of said to my wife at the time, like, if this was closer to where we live, I could definitely see us living in one of these locations. Um, and so, yeah, very impressed with Perth as a whole, but also the suburbs in the sort of outer ring
Okay.
of that market as well. So, but yeah, being on the ground does help a lot in sort of getting an understanding of, a bit more knowledge around the locality of different things, and
Is there
being in and around the market.
something specific that you look for when you're on the ground doing your due diligence?
I suppose it's just getting a better understanding of proximity to different things, looking condition of
Okay.
different areas, and so on. If you spend, I in all of the markets, I spent time just driving through streets. So any local looking at me probably think I'm a bit weird, but I'm just driving up and down streets, just looking at the houses, seeing what they're like, how far certain things are, because obviously you can see it from a bird's eye view on, like, say, Google Maps or something
That's
like
right.
that. But actually being there is a bit different. And so I was driving through the streets of Rockingham and through Mandurah as well, just really impressed with some of the suburbs there and how they looked. And so, yeah, I suppose locals will have their perspectives on those different areas, but I've been in a number of different locations, and so I was quite impressed with how sort of tidy many of the properties were there. As I say, close proximity to the beach.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that made a lot of sense for me to then go and make that next purchase in that location.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I know. I remember. I think when I was driving around Logan area, I can see all that furniture being dumped outside, and lawns not being looked after. You see those pink curtains, which yeah, they're still very memorable. Let's put it that way. And I did recall. I think I also, because I was looking around the Logan Central, and I went to Logan Central shopping center, and it just felt unsafe. I took my laptop into the shopping center, and then straight away I walked out just because I feel like I'm going to get marked the next minute. So I took it out, put it back into the trunk of the car, and I walked back in again. Now I feel a lot safer, but still looking at the demographics around me, I was like, yeah, okay.
It's funny that because I did the same thing. I went to pretty sure it was local central
Yeah,
shopping center, and I sat down on one of the benches and I just sat there and I was eating lunch,
yeah,
and 5 minutes goes by. I'm like, oh, this isn't too bad, and then I was probably about there half an hour or something like that. And then over that half an hour, like, oh, now I understand what people are talking about. Now I get
yeah,
it.
yeah.
But I mean, growing up in and around Blacktown was pretty similar. To that sort of gave me that similar sort of vibe. And I suppose when I go to these different areas, I always try to make the comparison of what does this remind me of
Yeah,
from Sydney.
yeah,
Um, and so, yeah, in and around Logan Central is probably the equivalent of a Mount Druitt or a Blacktown or something like that.
yeah.
But being, yeah, as I said, in and around Mandurah and Rockingham, I was like, sort of reminded me of the Central Coast, not to the same extent in terms of size, but just that sort of feel that I got being there on the water,
Mm, mm.
on the esplanade down each of those areas. And so
Oh,
I
nice.
thought for what you're spending in these locations, like, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect, perfect. Okay, awesome. No, thanks, Brendan. Before we wrap up today, I do want to tap into your mind in terms of so these four latest purchases that we spoke about today. Um, if you knowing what you know today, would you have done something differently in terms of asset selection across just these four properties, or anything that you would do different? What are the lessons that you learned?
Yeah, good question. I think I would, in hindsight, funny thing, obviously, you go back, you sort of said, if I'd done this differently, I'd have done this differently. So there is a number of things. Ultimately, I am satisfied with where I've got to at this stage, but
Yep.
there probably would have been a number of things if I had known back then would have been much more beneficial. So one, and this is sort of earlier on in the piece, but the time I took from purchasing the first to the second property was about, I think it was about 18 months. And it wasn't necessarily because we didn't have the funds there. I think, sorry, the second property to the third property was about um, 18 months-ish. And it wasn't because we didn't have the funds there. It's because I sort of had in my mind, well, we'll buy a property sort of one each year and continue to accumulate slowly. However, if I had a little bit more confidence in what I was doing, I probably would have gone and purchased earlier. And although it doesn't sound like a long period of time, but if I had purchased 6, 12 months earlier for that second to third purchase, it obviously would have ramped up the following and subsequent purchases throughout building the entire portfolio. And so then I look at it from a perspective of, if I pulled back all of my purchases by 6 months, I probably end up saving a couple $100,000 because of how quickly the market moved in 2021. And so that was a big thing for me. I think looking back, I go, yeah, if I were taking action quicker, even though ultimately I didn't taking action and purchasing, but if I was a little bit more confident, taking a little bit quicker response to buy, I potentially could have ended up purchasing that seventh property, maybe middle of last year. And maybe I'd now be at a stage where I could have either bought more or manufactured more equity that way by having lower purchase prices.
Sure.
So that was a big thing. And then I suppose second thing was, I was happy with the purchases that I've made in Adelaide because of what they've done in terms of adding to the portfolio, and they've obviously already seen some decent growth. But I think in hindsight, I probably would have, I think for all of my purchases, tried to purchase at a slightly lower price point with the ones that were in the 400K mark. So trying to buy at that sort of 3 to 350 mark. And I think if I'd done that across 3 or 4 of the properties I spent more on, then maybe that would have left room for another property to add to the portfolio. And so I think that sort of ties in with the first thing as well, because if I'd bought in Adelaide 6, 12 months earlier, instead of paying 420, I'm probably end up paying like 350. Across those 2 properties, that's obviously 150 grand.
Sure.
The Perth property 6 months earlier would have been another 50 grand. So I suppose it's all equity that I sort of left on the table, but in hindsight, you don't know that at the time, and you obviously have to deal with wherever you're up to at that stage.
That's right.
And the only other thing I was going to touch on was, there was a stage where I was pulling out equity. I think it was to refinance property 3 and 4. And I ended up getting desktop valuations, and maybe it came out to about 100 grand worth of equity I could have pulled out.
Sure.
And I sort of thought, well, I think these properties are valued higher than what these desktops are giving us. So let's get a full val done and hope that we can get more put out. Unfortunately, because of the way the market was moving so quickly, and because valuers love to undervalue properties, the valuations ended up coming below the desktop. And so there's less equity that we could have pulled out. And I think we ended up pulling 50 or 60 grand out when we could have had 100.
Bugger.
And so that was quite disappointing. But I think that was also a big lesson to learn that at that stage, I hadn't had much to do with valuations and getting full valuations done. So at least I know now, like, if there's a decent desktop and that's sufficient, it's probably worthwhile running with that rather than trying to squeeze out an extra 10 or 20, because in most cases they may not necessarily value the property at what it's actually worth.
Yeah, in general. And also, I think from a bank's perspective, the full valuation would trump over the desktop valuation as well. So even if you want to go, do you know what, I don't really want to use the full valuation, they still have full visibility, unfortunately, and they will adopt the low offer too. So, but you're right. I think a lot of times, we as investors, we tend to be slightly greedy. We kind of, no, we think that it's definitely worth more. But like I said, I think the actual full valuation is like a Russian roulette to me. Like, there's basically no logic behind it. It ties in a lot with who you're going to get, what time you're going to get, you know, whether I even joke about whether the valuer was in a good mood on that day or not to a degree. So, yeah, but that was a valuable lesson. That's for sure. If you get a good desktop valuation, I would say just use it, pull the equity out, be happy with it. You know, we're all wait a couple more months and try it again, potentially.
Exactly right. And that's what ended up happening because we got those full valuations done.
Yeah.
They had to use those as what the valuations were. So then we couldn't come back to revalue for another, I think it was 3 months.
3 months. Yeah.
And so that essentially set me back 3 months there as well. So that was a big learning curve. And, you know, as you said, like I've done valuations where I've sort of thought we're stretching here with what we're asking for, but then they've got pretty close to meeting it. And then other times where they've just been way off the mark. So it's very hit and miss.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nah. All good. No, thank you, Branden. Look, once again, thank you for being so generous in terms of sharing your knowledge and you're sharing your journey today. I'm sure our listeners have got lots out of it. It's a fascinating story. Look, I can't wait to hear until your next purchase. I'm sure, you know, next one's probably sometime on the cards next year. We'll see how we go on that. But yeah, we'll definitely bring you back on again to give everyone a bit of update on that then.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, David.
Thanks, Branden. And to everyone else, all listeners today, thank you very much for joining us for another episode of Spark Your Fire. If you guys like this episode, give us a like, leave us some comments, reviews in terms of what you'd like to hear more, like to see more. But until next time, we will see you guys again in another episode of Spark Your Fire. Take care and see ya.